My name is Eleanor Reynolds. I'm 65, and just days after my son's funeral, I discovered his widow was planning to sell his house and move my grandson across the country with her lover. She thought she had me fooled, playing the part of the grieving wife. But she never suspected I was about to use my son's final, secret gift to me to turn her entire world upside down. It's late here now, and the house is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. It's a peaceful sound that I've come to cherish. I'd love to know where you're all listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop me a comment below. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little friendlier. The sound that shattered my world wasn't a crash or a scream. It was the shrill, insistent ring of the telephone at 2:17 a.m. In the dead quiet of my small suburban home, a phone call at that hour is a messenger from the abyss. It's never good news. It's a harbinger, a cold dread that seeps into your bones before you even lift the receiver, your mind already cataloging the worst possible scenarios. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, as I fumbled for the lamp on my nightstand. "Mrs. Reynolds?" a calm, detached voice said on the other end. It was the voice of a hospital. The carefully modulated tone they train people to use when they're about to rip a life apart with a few sterile words. My only son, my James, was gone. A brain aneurysm, the voice explained. Sudden, massive, no warning. He was 42, a man in the prime of his life, a structural engineer who built bridges, a husband, a father. He was strong. He ran 5K races for charity. He could lift his 8-year-old son Lucas onto his shoulders without a grunt. And now, according to this disembodied voice, he was just gone. The word didn't compute. It was like being told the sky was now green. It was an impossibility my mind refused to accept. The drive to the hospital was a surreal nightmare, a tunnel of streetlights smearing through a thick film of tears. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with the age I suddenly felt so profoundly, trembled on the steering wheel. My world had shrunk to a single, agonizing loop of memories. James at 5, a gap-toothed grin splitting his face as he held up a finger painting of a lopsided sun, his hands covered in yellow paint. James at 16, awkward and proud in his first rented tuxedo for the prom, fumbling with the corsage for his date. James at his wedding, his eyes shining with a fierce, boundless love as he looked at his bride, Sophia. James, just last week, in this very backyard, lifting Lucas onto his broad shoulders, both of them roaring with a deep, rumbling laugh that was so much like his father's, a sound I thought I would hear for another 30 years. When I stumbled into the emergency room, a nurse with kind but exhausted eyes led me to a small, sterile waiting room designated for families receiving the worst news. And that's where I first saw her, Sophia. She was standing by the window, her back to me, talking on her phone in a hushed, urgent whisper. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a stylish black dress that looked more suited for a cocktail party than a hospital vigil. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed. As she turned, I saw her face. It was a mask of composed sorrow, but her eyes were dry, and they were cold and angry. "Oh, Eleanor!" she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too theatrical in the quiet room. She rushed over to hug me, her expensive perfume cloying and grotesquely out of place amidst the antiseptic smell of the hospital. The hug was stiff, brief, the embrace of a stranger. "I can't believe it. I just can't believe he's gone." I mumbled something incoherent. My own grief was a thick, suffocating blanket that stole my breath. But even through the dense fog of my own pain, something felt jarringly wrong. A mother knows the landscape of grief. A wife should know it too, but Sophia's grief felt hollow. A performance for an unseen audience, a role she was playing. A young doctor came in and spoke to us in gentle, somber tones. He explained what had happened, using clinical words like catastrophic and non-survivable. I clung to every word, trying to find some logic, some reason in the senseless chaos. But Sophia kept glancing at her phone, which she held in a white-knuckled grip. She nodded at the doctor, but her attention was clearly elsewhere. When the doctor left, I asked her, my voice raspy, "Did you call your parents? Does anyone else know?" She waved a dismissive hand. "I will, later. I need a minute to process." She walked back to the window, her phone already pressed to her ear again. I couldn't hear the words, but the cadence was sharp, irritated. It wasn't the sound of a woman sharing tragic news with a loved one. It was the sound of a business deal gone wrong, of an inconvenient obstacle. Later, when they let us see him, I broke. Seeing my beautiful, vibrant boy lying there so still and pale, the life force that was James extinguished forever, it was an agony that had no words. I held his hand, which was already growing cold, and I wept. I wept for the man he was, for the grandfather he would never be, for the gaping, raw wound he left in the world and in my heart. Sophia stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek as if on cue. Then she murmured something about needing to make arrangements and slipped out of the room, leaving me alone with my son. And in that profound, terrible silence, a memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was from Lucas's last birthday party, just a few months ago. The backyard was filled with the shrieks and laughter of 8-year-old boys. I was helping James clean up some spilled juice when he suddenly grew serious. He glanced over at Sophia, who was laughing loudly with another mother, a glass of wine in her hand, seemingly oblivious to her own son's party. "James, Mom," he said, his voice low and strained, "if anything ever happens to me, I mean anything, I need you to look out for Lucas." James, don't talk like that," I chided gently, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. He shook his head, his eyes intense, his eyes clouded with a sadness I didn't understand at the time. "I'm serious. Things with Sophia and me, they're complicated. Just promise me you'll protect him. You're the only one I can truly trust." At the time, I had dismissed it as a fleeting moment of marital strife, the kind all couples go through. But now, standing by his deathbed, watching his strangely composed widow through the glass partition as she paced the hallway on her phone, his words echoed in my mind like a prophecy, a ghostly warning. "You're the only one I can truly trust." Something was terribly wrong. And as I looked at my son's peaceful face for the last time, I made him a silent, solemn promise. I didn't know what I was up against or what he had been so desperately trying to warn me about, but I would find out, and I would protect his son, no matter what it took.
The funeral was a somber affair, a sea of black suits and sorrowful faces under a perpetually gray sky. Friends and colleagues spoke of James's integrity, his kindness, his infectious laugh. Each eulogy was a fresh stab to my heart. Sophia, for her part, played the role of the grieving widow to perfection. She wore a black veil that artfully shadowed her face, dabbed at her dry eyes with a delicate lace handkerchief, and accepted condolences with a tragic, fragile grace that seemed rehearsed. She held Lucas's hand so tightly his knuckles were white, keeping him close as a prop in her heartbreaking tableau. Lucas just looked lost. A small ship adrift in a vast ocean of adult grief he couldn't comprehend. I watched Sophia's performance, my own grief, a raw, real, and messy thing, and felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my stomach. A week later, I found myself sitting in the plush leather chair of a downtown law office. The air smelled of old books, lemon polish, and money. The firm, Bennett and Associates, was etched in gold on the mahogany door. Sophia sat across from me, next to her own lawyer, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit. She looked impatient, tapping her manicured nails on the polished table. She expected this to be a formality, a simple reading of a standard will that would confirm her as the sole heir to James's considerable estate. In the car on the way over, she had been talking about putting the house on the market, mentioning how a quick sale would be less painful and better for Lucas's future. Thomas Bennett, my son's lawyer, was a man in his late 50s, with a kind, lived-in face and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He had been James's friend since their college days, a bond that went deeper than billable hours. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the quiet, wood-paneled room, and began to read. He started with a few small bequests, a donation to the engineering school at James's alma mater, another to a local animal shelter. Sophia shifted in her chair, a sigh of impatience escaping her lips. Then Thomas took a deep breath and looked directly at me, his gaze steady and meaningful. He said, regarding the primary assets, including the property at 123 Oak Lane, all vehicles registered in my client's name, and the entirety of personal savings, checking, and investment accounts, James has bequeathed them in their entirety to his mother, Eleanor Reynolds. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like a physical pressure in my ears. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at Thomas, my mind struggling to process his words. It made no sense. Why would James do that? Why would he cut out his wife, the mother of his child, so completely? Sophia's head snapped up. What? The word was a strangled, venomous whisper. Her lawyer leaned forward, his smooth demeanor cracking. Excuse me, Mr. Bennett, there must be a mistake. We have a copy of Mr. Reynolds' previous will from 5 years ago. Thomas shook his head slowly, his expression grim. There is no mistake. This is a new will, executed, signed, and witnessed 3 months ago. It is ironclad. He continued, his voice steady, as he delivered the final blow. Furthermore, James established a separate and irrevocable trust for his son, Lucas Reynolds, for his education and well-being. The college fund is substantial. James appointed his mother, Eleanor Reynolds, as the sole trustee, with full and exclusive authority over its management until Lucas turns 25. Sophia shot out of her chair, her face a grotesque mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The grieving widow was gone, replaced by a spitting fury. This is insane! He wouldn't do that! She manipulated him! This old woman has been poisoning my husband against me for years! Her lawyer tried to place a calming hand on her arm, but she shook it off. I will contest this. This is a joke. That house, that money, that's my inheritance. It's for my future, for Lucas's future. He loved me. I remained silent, my own grief rendering me speechless. My heart ached for my son. What had been happening in his life, in his marriage, that had pushed him to take such a drastic secret step? This wasn't an act of spite. It was a desperate act of protection. But protection from what? Sophia, finally realizing her outburst was destroying the very image she had so carefully crafted, grabbed her purse, and stormed out of the office, her lawyers scrambling after her, apologizing profusely. The door slammed shut, leaving me and Thomas in the ringing silence. I finally found my voice, a weak and trembling thing. "Thomas, I don't understand. Why?" He gave me a sad, weary smile. "I think you do. Or at least James was counting on you to understand." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, ornate key and a sealed, cream-colored envelope. "He left this for you. His instructions were clear. I was only to give it to you if he passed, and only after the will had been read in your presence." My hand trembled as I took the items. The key was heavy, old-fashioned for a safe deposit box at the First National Bank downtown. The envelope simply had my name on it, written in James's familiar, strong handwriting. "He told me," Thomas said softly, his professional demeanor softening into that of a grieving friend, "that things were difficult. He said if anything happened, you would know what to do. He trusted you, Eleanor, completely." I drove home in a daze, the key cold in my palm, the envelope lying on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. When I got inside my quiet little house, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table that James had done his homework as a boy, and with trembling fingers, I opened the letter. It wasn't a letter. It was just a single sheet of notepaper torn from a legal pad. On it, in my son's hand, were 7 words. "Don't believe her tears. Protect my boy." A sob escaped my throat, a raw, ragged sound. Tears streamed down my face, blurring the ink. This was his final message to me, a desperate plea from beyond the grave. He hadn't disinherited his wife out of malice. He had built a fortress around his son, a financial and legal stronghold, and he just handed me the key. The sterile, quiet viewing room at the bank felt like the starting point of a race I never wanted to run. The air was cool and still, smelling faintly of metal and old paper. I slid the heavy safe deposit box out of its slot and carried it to the small table, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I was a 65-year-old woman whose biggest recent drama was a protracted battle with aphids on my prize-winning roses. Now I was about to delve into the secret life of my deceased son, and I was terrified of what I might find. With a deep breath, I inserted the key. The lock turned with a satisfyingly solid click. I lifted the lid.
I had expected to find legal documents, financial statements, perhaps a detailed letter of explanation that would lay out the whole sordid story for me. I had braced myself for a finished case file. But James, ever the engineer, hadn't given me a finished structure. He'd given me a blueprint and a pile of raw materials. Inside the box, there was no grand file of evidence. There was a cheap, prepaid burner phone, the kind you see in spy movies. There was a thick stack of credit card statements from a card I didn't recognize, issued by an obscure online bank. And there was a small, black leather-bound notebook, the kind a reporter might use. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't a solution, it was a puzzle, a trail of breadcrumbs leading into a dark wood. My son hadn't just left me instructions, he had left me an investigation. He had trusted me not just to follow a plan, but to have the intelligence and the fortitude to uncover the truth myself. I picked up the notebook first, my fingers tracing the smooth leather. I half expected it to be a diary, filled with James' thoughts and fears, but when I opened it, my heart sank. It was almost entirely empty, page after page of pristine, lined paper. Only on the first few pages were there any entries, and they were maddeningly cryptic. They were just dates, times, and single initials. October 12, 9:15 p.m., R. November 3, 11:30 p.m., R. November 21, 10 p.m., R.
There were a dozen such entries over the past few months. Who was R? And what happened on those dates? It felt like a code I didn't have the key to decipher. Next, I sifted through the credit card statements. The card was in James's name, but it was a card I'd never seen him use, with a billing address routed to a P.O. box. The charges were not for his usual expenses, like hardware stores or family restaurants. They were fancy hotels in the city, expensive dinners for two at places Sophia would have deemed not trendy enough, and, most tellingly, several large recurring charges to a firm called Orion Investigative Services. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. My son had been investigating his own wife. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The pain he must have been in, the profound loneliness of carrying that terrible secret. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to burden me, and perhaps in some small, hopeful corner of his heart, he was still trying to find a reason to believe he was wrong. Finally, the burner phone. It felt alien in my hand, a tool of deceit. After fumbling with it for a few minutes, I managed to turn it on. The battery was nearly full. There were no contacts saved, but there was a string of text messages in the inbox, all from the same unknown number. Like the notebook, they were coded, professional, and chillingly impersonal. Package delivered, awaiting instructions. Visual confirmation at the usual spot, same subject. Report sent to the secure email, payment received. It was the language of espionage, not the language of a suburban family. The package and report had to be from the private investigator. James had been investigating his own wife. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The pain he must have been in, the profound loneliness of carrying that terrible secret. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to burden me, and perhaps in some small, hopeful corner of his heart, he was still trying to find a reason to believe he was wrong. Finally, the burner phone. It felt alien in my hand, a tool of deceit. After fumbling with it for a few minutes, I managed to turn it on. The battery was nearly full. There were no contacts saved, but there was a string of text messages in the inbox, all from the same unknown number. Like the notebook, they were coded, professional, and chillingly impersonal. Package delivered, awaiting instructions. Visual confirmation at the usual spot, same subject. Report sent to the secure email, payment received. It was the language of espionage, not the language of a suburban family. The package and report had to be from the private investigator. James had been investigating his own wife. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The pain he must have been in, the profound loneliness of carrying that terrible secret. He hadn't told me because he didn't want to burden me, and perhaps in some small, hopeful corner of his heart, he was still trying to find a reason to believe he was wrong. Finally, the burner phone. It felt alien in my hand, a tool of deceit. After fumbling with it for a few minutes, I managed to turn it on. The battery was nearly full. There were no contacts saved, but there was a string of text messages in the inbox, all from the same unknown number. Like the notebook, they were coded, professional, and chillingly impersonal. Package delivered, awaiting instructions. Visual confirmation at the usual spot, same subject. Report sent to the secure email, payment received. It was the language of espionage, not the language of a suburban family, and package and report had to be from the private investigator. James had been investigating his own wife. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The pain he must have been in, the profound loneliness of carrying that terrible secret, he hadn't told me because he didn't want to burden me, and in some small, hopeful corner of his heart, he was still trying to find a reason to believe he was wrong. A plan started to form in my mind, a wild and audacious plan that made my heart race with a mixture of terror and resolve. If I wanted to find the truth, if I wanted to access that secure email, I couldn't do it from the outside. I had to get inside, I had to be close to Sophia, close to her computer, close to her life. I needed to be in that house. That evening, I rehearsed my lines, then picked up the phone and dialed her number. I pitched my voice to sound frail, lonely, and a little lost, the very picture of a helpless old woman. Sophia, dear, I've been thinking, this big house is so empty without James, and your house? Well, it must be so hard for you being all alone with Lucas and all the memories. There was a suspicious silence on the other end. What are you getting at, Eleanor? Her voice was sharp, impatient. I was just thinking maybe it would be good for all of us if I came and stayed for a while. I could help with Lucas, with the cooking, and frankly, I don't want to be alone right now. And with the inheritance situation, it seems only fair that I contribute to the household expenses from the estate. I dangled the financial bait deliberately, knowing it was the only language she truly understood. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Her own lawyer had probably advised her to be civil, to try and win me over, to gently persuade me to sign things over to her. Having me in the house, under her roof, where she could watch me and manipulate me, from her perspective, it was the perfect move. She would see me as a grieving, naive old woman she could easily control. You know, Eleanor, she said, her tone shifting instantly to one of syrupy concern, that's actually a wonderful idea. It would be so good for Lucas to have his grandmother here. We need each other right now. The ease with which she agreed confirmed my suspicions. She saw me as a pawn, not a threat. And that's exactly what I needed. I was walking into the lion's den, but I was doing it by choice. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a hunter. Walking into my son's house felt different this time. It was no longer just the happy, slightly chaotic home where Lucas's toys were always scattered on the living room floor, and the smell of James's freshly ground coffee was always in the air. Now it felt like a stage, and a tense, unspoken play was in progress. Sophia greeted me at the door with a hug that was all for show, a bright, brittle smile plastered on her face that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Eleanor, we're so glad you're here," she chirped, her voice a pitch too high. "Lucas, look who it is. Grandma's here to stay with us for a while." Lucas came running from the living room and wrapped his small, strong arms around my legs. "Grandma!" His hug was the only real thing I had felt all day, a small, warm anchor in a sea of deceit. I knelt down and held him tight, burying my face in his soft hair, inhaling the innocent little boy scent of him. Looking into his eyes so much like his father's, but clouded with confusion he couldn't articulate, I felt my resolve solidify into something unbreakable. This was why I was here.
For the first few days, Sophia was the model of a perfect, caring daughter-in-law. She made me tea, fussed over my comfort in my guest room, and spoke in hushed, reverent tones whenever she mentioned James. She was also, I noticed, putting on a spectacular show of being the perfect mother. She made Lucas his favorite dinosaur-shaped pancakes for breakfast, helped him with his homework with a display of exaggerated patience I had never seen from her before, and read him 2, sometimes even 3 bedtime stories every night. It was a flawless performance. But I knew it was just that. A performance. I was the audience she was trying to impress. She thought that if she played her part well enough, the grieving, lonely old grandmother would eventually soften, would see what a wonderful mother she was, and would sign over the assets she so desperately craved. She was treating me like a mark, a simple problem to be managed. I played my own part, too. I became the slightly dotty, heartbroken mother-in-law she expected me to be. I would forget where I put my reading glasses. I would talk endlessly and tearfully about the old days when James was a boy. I made myself seem harmless, lost in my grief, and completely oblivious to the undercurrents of tension in the house.
I was a ghost at her table, a sad, faded presence she could safely ignore. "Oh, Sophia, you're such a wonderful mother," I'd say, my voice full of admiration, as I watched her pack Lucas's lunch with organic snacks she'd never bought before in her life. "James would be so proud of how well you're holding up." She would give me a sad, brave smile, the kind she'd practiced in the mirror. "I'm just trying to do what's best for Lucas. It's all about him now." It was a constant, silent chess match played out over dinner tables and bedtime stories. Every move she made was calculated. Every word I spoke was designed to lower her guard. The house, once filled with love and laughter, was now heavy with unspoken truths and secret agendas. The strain was immense. At night, I'd lie awake in the too quiet guest room, my mind racing, going over the day's events, searching for any crack in her carefully constructed facade. The crack came about a week into my stay. It was a Tuesday evening. Sophia had been on her phone all day, texting furiously, a small, tight smile on her face. She seemed agitated, expectant. That night, she told me she had a grief counseling support group she absolutely needed to attend. "It's just so hard, Eleanor. I need to talk to people who understand what I'm going through," she said, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes. "Of course, dear," I said soothingly, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "You go. You need to take care of yourself. I'll take care of Lucas." She left around 7, dressed in a chic black pantsuit and heels, hardly the attire for a somber support group. After I tucked Lucas into bed, reading him an extra chapter of his favorite adventure book, I waited. The house was quiet. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard in the next room. This was my first real opportunity. Her laptop was on the desk in the small home office they shared. I knew from watching her that she was careless with her passwords, a sign of her inherent arrogance. I sat down in James's old office chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I tried the most obvious one first, Lucas 123. Access denied. I tried her birthday, their anniversary, James's birthday. Nothing. My mind raced. What would a narcissist like Sophia use? Something meaningful only to her. I remembered a conversation from years ago where she'd bragged endlessly about a major promotion she had gotten at the marketing firm she worked at before she'd quit to be a stay-at-home mom. She had called it the moment her career really took off, the project that made her a star. I typed in the name of the project she'd been so proud of, Project Phoenix. The screen flickered and the desktop appeared. I was in. I felt a jolt of adrenaline mixed with a profound sense of violation. I was invading her privacy, snooping like a common thief. But then I thought of James's note, "Protect my boy." This wasn't about snooping. It was about arming myself for the battle he knew was coming. I didn't have much time. I had brought Snell USB drive with me, a habit from my old job as a bookkeeper. I worked quickly, my hands flying across the keyboard with a speed I didn't know I possessed. I didn't look for anything specific. I just started copying entire folders, documents, pictures, downloads, anything that looked promising. I focused on financial records, emails, and browser history. The progress bar on the screen seemed to move at a glacial pace. Every creak of the house, every car that passed on the street made me jump out of my skin. Finally, the transfer was complete. With trembling hands, I ejected the drive, cleared the recent activity log, and shut down the laptop, leaving everything exactly as I had found it. I slipped the USB drive into the small, hidden pocket of my purse, just as I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. It was only 9:30. Some support group. She came in, humming softly, a faint smell of wine on her breath. "It was good," she said, answering my unasked question with a bright smile. "It really helps to talk." I'm so glad, dear, I said, my heart still racing, but my voice miraculously calm. You need to take care of yourself. She smiled, completely unaware of what had just transpired. She thought she was in control. She thought she was the one playing a game. She had no idea that the harmless old woman sitting in the armchair knitting a scarf for her grandson had just stolen her entire digital life right out from under her nose. The USB drive felt like a hot coal in my purse. For 2 days, I did not dare look at it, terrified that Sophia, with some sixth sense of the guilty, might somehow perceive what I had done. I continued playing my role as the dotty, grieving grandmother, helping around the house, baking cookies with Lucas, and offering a sympathetic ear to Sophia's carefully curated tales of woe. She ramped up her campaign of subtle manipulation, complaining constantly about the mounting bills, the difficulty of managing James's affairs, while pointedly hinting at how much easier things would be if she had access to the main accounts. It's just so overwhelming, she sighed one afternoon, sorting through a pile of mail with a dramatic flair. I don't know how James managed it all. His salary was so good, but the expenses, they don't stop just because he's gone. I'm worried about our future, Eleanor. I'm sure we can figure it out together, dear, I said, my voice full of gentle reassurance, while my mind was screaming with the knowledge of her lies. We're a family, after all.
The opportunity to finally examine the drive's contents came unexpectedly. Sophia announced she was taking Lucas for a special Mommy Sunday at a large amusement park an hour away. "We just need to get out of this house, make some new, happy memories," she explained, her eyes shining with false sincerity. I knew it was another move in her game, a way to demonstrate to me what a devoted mother she was, perhaps hoping I'd feel guilty and more pliable. It was also, I suspected, a chance for her to meet someone there without having to invent an excuse. "What a wonderful idea," I encouraged her, helping Lucas into his jacket. "You two have a marvelous time. Don't worry about a thing here. I'll just rest." The moment their car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. I went to the guest room, locked the door, and pulled out my old, slow laptop from my suitcase. My hands trembled as I inserted the USB drive. The small device held the truth, and I was terrified of what it would confirm. It took an agonizingly long moment for the folders to load, a digital treasure trove of Sophia's life. I didn't know where to start. My bookkeeper instincts took over, and I clicked on a folder labeled Finances first. It was a chaotic mess of spreadsheets, credit card statements, and loan applications. One thing became immediately and shockingly clear. Sophia was drowning in debt. Serious debt. There were thousands upon thousands of dollars charged to high-end clothing stores, exclusive spas, and online boutiques I'd never even heard of. She had been living a secret, lavish lifestyle far beyond what James's comfortable but not extravagant salary could possibly support. There was even a recent loan application for a new luxury SUV dated just 2 weeks before James's death. She had been planning a future, and it was a future built on a mountain of debt and deceit. Next, I braced myself and opened her emails. Following the clue from James's notebook, I used the search bar and typed in the initial R. The results were overwhelming. There were hundreds of emails from a Richard Harlow. My blood ran cold. I clicked on the oldest one from 6 months ago. "Sophia, thinking of you. Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again. R." I scrolled through them, my disgust and horror growing with each message. They were filled with lovers' pet names, explicit plans for secret meetings, and cruel, dismissive complaints about James. Richard, it seemed, was a wealthy real estate developer. They talked about their future together, about the dream house they would build in Scottsdale, Arizona. "Once the old baggage is out of the way, we can finally start our life. Just get the assets secured. That's the final piece of the puzzle, my love." "I'm working on it," Sophia had replied, just a month before James died. "He's being difficult, suspicious. But don't worry, I know how to handle him. And his mother, if she becomes a problem, will be even easier. She's a sentimental old fool." I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the desk. They had been talking about my son, her husband, the father of her child, as old baggage. They had a cold, calculated plan to take his money and build a new life on the ashes of our family. My grief for James was suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot, righteous rage. But there was more. In a subfolder of her documents, I found the final, damning piece of evidence. It was a draft of a legal document, a prenuptial agreement. Not for her and James, but for her and Richard Harlow. It was dated a month before James died. She had been planning her next marriage while still in her current one. This wasn't just a passionate affair. This was a long-term strategic takeover. She wasn't just cheating on my son, she was actively preparing to replace him. This was the evidence James must have been gathering. This was the truth he couldn't bring himself to tell me. But how could I use it? My victory was also a trap. I couldn't just march out and accuse her. This was illegally obtained. A good lawyer would get it thrown out of court in a heartbeat. I had the truth, but I didn't have usable proof. My investigation had to be smarter. I needed evidence that I had obtained legally. I needed witnesses. I thought about the neighbors, the ones that Sophia had always been so dismissive of. Perhaps their nosiness could be my greatest asset. The next day, while Sophia was at a yoga class, I baked a batch of my famous lemon poppy seed muffins and took them next door to the Hendersons, an older couple who had lived on the street for 30 years. "Eleanor, how are you holding up, dear?" Martha Henderson asked, her face etched with genuine concern as she led me into her sunny kitchen. "I'm taking it one day at a time. It's good to be here for Lucas, to keep things as normal as possible." We chatted for a while about the weather and our gardens. Then I steered the conversation gently. "Sophia is so busy trying to be strong for Lucas. She's hardly ever home, it seems, always running errands." Martha's eyes flickered. "Well, she does have a lot of visitors," she said, lowering her voice. "There's a man in a fancy black car, a Mercedes, I think. He comes by quite often, usually when you're out with Lucas at the park." My heart leapt. "Oh," I asked, trying to sound casual. "Must be a colleague from her old job helping with paperwork." Martha pursed her lips. "He doesn't look like he's there for paperwork, dear. He never brings a briefcase." I had my first potential witness. I spent the rest of the week accidentally running into other neighbors, dropping off baked goods, asking for gardening tips, and I listened. I heard about the loud, angry arguments James and Sophia used to have, muffled through the walls. I heard about Sophia leaving Lucas alone for short periods to run errands. Each story was another small piece of the puzzle, another crack in the perfect facade Sophia had built. She thought she was invisible, but a quiet suburban neighborhood has 1,000 eyes, and I was collecting every observation. The weight of the secrets I was carrying was becoming a physical burden. The small USB drive in my purse felt like 100 pounds. I was sleeping in my son's house, eating at his table with the woman who had so cruelly betrayed him, and every smile I gave her, every gentle word, felt like a lie that soared in my mouth. The isolation was crushing me. I needed to talk to someone. I needed an ally. My first and only choice was Carol. My best friend for over 40 years, Carol was the kind of person you could call at 3 a.m. with a crisis, and she'd show up with a thermos of coffee and a shovel, no questions asked until you were ready to talk. I invited her over for lunch one day when Sophia had taken Lucas to a dentist's appointment, a rare, legitimate errand. We sat in the backyard, at the same patio table where James had given me his cryptic warning just months before. The air was warm, the garden was in bloom, but I felt a chill deep in my bones. I took a deep breath and told her everything. I started with James's warning, then the will, the key, the safe deposit box. I told her about the burner phone, the private investigator, the laptop, and the sickening emails between Sophia and a man named Richard. I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice low and trembling with a mixture of anger and grief. When I finished, I expected outrage on my behalf, a call to arms. I expected her to be as horrified as I was. Instead, Carol looked at me with deep, worried eyes. Her brow furrowed in concern. "Ellie," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "this is a lot. Are you absolutely sure you're seeing this clearly? You've just lost James. Grief does strange things to a person. It can make us see things that aren't there. Look for people to blame because the randomness of it all is too much to bear." Her words were a punch to the gut, a betrayal I hadn't expected. Doubt from my oldest, dearest friend, Carol. I saw the emails with my own eyes. I saw the prenup for her and this other man. It was dated before James died. This isn't in my head. "But you got that information by hacking into her computer," she pointed out, ever the pragmatist. "That's illegal, Ellie. An aggressive lawyer would tear you apart on the stand for that. They'd say you're a bitter, greedy old woman consumed by grief, trying to steal your daughter-in-law's inheritance and her child. They would make you look like the villain." Tears of frustration and loneliness stung my eyes. "So I'm supposed to do nothing? Just sit here and watch her pack up my grandson and move to Arizona with this man who called my son old baggage? I made a promise, Carol." "No," Carol said, her expression softening as she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, a lifeline. "I'm not saying do nothing. I believe you. I'm just saying we have to be smart. You can't go in like a bulldozer fueled by rage. You have to be a surgeon, precise and careful. You have the truth, but you need proof, legal, admissible proof." Her initial skepticism, as much as it had hurt me, was exactly what I needed to hear. It was a splash of cold, clear water on my face. She was right. I had been driven by emotion, by a primal need to protect my grandson and honor my son. I needed a strategy. Carol's doubt forced me to look at my situation not as a grieving mother, but as a tactician in a war I could not afford to lose. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier now, my resolve hardening. "So what do we do?" A slow, determined smile spread across Carol's face. "Now you're talking. First, you need to tell your lawyer everything, the real story. No more holding back. You need a professional to guide this." The next day, I made an appointment with Thomas Bennett. I sat in his office again, but this time, I wasn't the shocked and confused woman I had been before. I was a soldier reporting for duty. I laid out everything just as I had for Carol, but this time I included the details from the neighbors and my own observations. I told him about the safe deposit box, the emails, the debt, the affair, the plan to move to Arizona. I even admitted, with a lump in my throat, to copying the files from Sophia's laptop, and I placed the USB drive on his polished desk between us. He listened patiently, his face unreadable, his gaze never leaving mine. He didn't interrupt once. When I was finished, he steepled his fingers and looked at me over the top of them for a long, silent moment. "Eleanor," he said, his tone serious and measured, "you have put yourself in a legally precarious position. As your friend Carol rightly pointed out, this evidence," he gestured towards the USB drive, "is, in all likelihood, inadmissible. It's what we call fruit of the poisonous tree. Because you obtained it illegally, any evidence that stems from it could also be thrown out. If we use it, our entire case for custody could be jeopardized." My heart sank. "So it was all for nothing? All that risk?" "No," he said quickly, leaning forward, "not for nothing. It's invaluable. It gives us a roadmap. It tells us what we need to find and where we need to look. It confirms our suspicions and gives us targets. We just have to find the evidence the right way." He paused, his eyes sharp. "This man, Richard Harlow, you said he's a real estate developer?" I nodded. "Good. People in that business have public profiles, business dealings, a paper trail. They aren't ghosts. We can find out more about him." He leaned back in his chair. "Eleanor, this is going to be a fight. Sophia and her lawyer will be ruthless. They will paint you as unstable, vindictive, senile. Are you prepared for that? To have your character, your sanity, your motives attacked in open court?" I thought of Lucas's small hand in mine. I thought of the promise I made to James in the cold silence of the hospital. I am. Good, he said again, and a hint of a smile touched his lips. Because James chose you for a reason. He knew you wouldn't back down. Then he laid out a plan. We needed to continue documenting every instance of Sophia's negligence, every missed appointment, every time she left Lucas with a stranger, every late-night support group meeting. We needed to get sworn affidavits from the witnesses, like the teacher and the neighbors. But that might not be enough, Thomas warned. She can claim she's just a grieving widow doing her best, that she's overwhelmed. To win this, we need something definitive, something that shows her intent, her character, in a way that can't be denied by a judge. He suggested something that made my blood run cold, but I knew he was right. We need to hire a professional, the private investigator James used, Orion Investigative Services. We'll re-engage them. They already have the background. We need them to get us the kind of evidence that will stand up in court. Photos, verifiable timelines, things she can't explain away as a misunderstanding. The idea of bringing another stranger into this deeply personal family crisis felt like a further violation, but I knew it was necessary. The cost would be significant, eating into the very funds I was trying to protect, but it was never about the money. Do it, I said, my voice firm, whatever it takes. I left Thomas's office feeling a strange mixture of fear and empowerment. My team was assembled. I had Carol for moral support and strategic brainstorming, and Thomas for legal firepower. The path ahead was daunting and ugly, but for the first time since James's death, I didn't feel completely alone. I had allies, and we had a battle plan.
With Thomas officially re-engaging Mr. Fisher from Orion Investigative Services, my role shifted. I was no longer just a detective. I was the operative on the inside, the eyes and ears of our small team. My primary job was to continue my observation and documentation, but now with a more focused purpose. Every note I took, every detail I recorded about Sophia's behavior and Lucas's well-being was a potential piece of the official record, a brick in the wall of evidence we were building against her. The strain of my double life was beginning to take a serious toll. I felt a constant, low-level hum of anxiety, a tightness in my chest that never went away. I had to be vigilant every moment, careful not to let my mask of the dotty, harmless grandmother slip. I was sleeping poorly, my nights filled with troubled dreams. I was losing weight. But every time I looked at Lucas, I found a new well of strength. Sophia, for her part, was growing increasingly impatient, her facade of the grieving widow cracking under the pressure of her mounting debts. The money from James's accounts was still locked away, under my control as per the will, and her creditors were becoming more persistent. The polite fiction of our shared grief was wearing thin, replaced by an almost palpable tension. The atmosphere in the house grew thick and suffocating. The silences at the dinner table were heavier, the fake smiles more strained. Sophia started making passive-aggressive comments, little verbal jabs designed to wear me down. "It must be nice not to have to worry about a mortgage," she'd say while looking through a stack of bills with a dramatic sigh. Or, "I'm just not sure how I'll afford Lucas's summer camp this year. It's a shame he might have to miss out because of all this legal nonsense." I knew she was trying to guilt me, to pressure me into releasing funds. I would just nod sympathetically, my face a mask of concern. "We'll work something out, dear. We're a family. We have to stick together." Then came the setback. It was a stupid, careless mistake on my part, born of exhaustion. I had been getting bolder in my note-taking, using a small spiral notepad I kept in my apron pocket to jot down observations throughout the day. One afternoon, while I was baking cookies with Lucas, I took the apron off and left it draped over a kitchen chair. We went into the backyard to play catch, the warm sun and Lucas's laughter, a brief, welcome respite from the gloom of the house, and I forgot all about it. When I came back inside to get us some lemonade, my heart stopped. I saw Sophia standing by the chair, my apron in one hand, the notepad in the other. Her face was pale, her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. She was reading it. She was reading my notes about her late-night absences, the name Richard, the dates that corresponded with her business trips, my suspicions about her phone calls. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She did something far more chilling. She looked up at me, a slow, cold, calculating smile spreading across her lips. It was the smile of a predator that has just cornered its prey. "Taking up a new hobby, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Creative writing?" My blood turned to ice. My mind raced for an excuse, a plausible lie. It's nothing," I stammered, my voice sounding weak and unconvincing even to my own ears. "Just jotting down memories of James to help with the grief. Sometimes I get confused about the dates." She let out a short, sharp laugh that had no humor in it. "Memories? I see you have a very detailed memory from my comings and goings." She tossed the notepad onto the counter as if it were contaminated. "You should be careful, Eleanor. An old woman, all alone, living in a house that isn't hers. People might think you're getting confused. They might think you're not fit to be making major financial decisions or decisions about the welfare of a child." The threat was clear, hanging in the air between us like a drawn sword. She was going to paint me as senile, unstable. She was going to try to have me declared incompetent, to have my trusteeship revoked. My stupid, careless mistake had given her a powerful new weapon. From that day on, the house became a cold war zone. She watched my every move. She would helpfully remind me of things I hadn't forgotten. She'd ask me the same question multiple times a day to see if my answer changed, trying to catch me in a contradiction. She was building her own case against me, and I had handed her the blueprint. I had lost the crucial element of surprise, and I felt a rising tide of panic. My carefully constructed plan was falling apart. That night, after she'd gone out to another of her support groups, I called Carl, my voice a desperate whisper from the locked guest room. "She knows, Carl. She found my notes. She thinks I'm a senile old fool, and she's going to use it against me in court. I've ruined everything." "Okay, stop and breathe, Ellie," Carl said, her voice a lifeline of calm in my storm of panic. "So she knows you're watching. That doesn't change the truth of what she's doing. It just means the game has changed. You're not playing stealth anymore. Now it's a direct confrontation." We talked for over an hour, and a new, bolder plan began to form, born of desperation. I had been on the defensive, reacting to her moves. It was time to go on the offensive. I couldn't rely on just collecting evidence of her negligence anymore. I needed to create a situation where she would expose herself, in her own words, in a way that was undeniable. The next morning, I called Thomas. "Mr. Fisher, the investigator," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "Has he found anything yet? Anything solid?" "He has," he confirmed, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "He followed Sophia on her yoga retreat last weekend. It was a retreat for two at a 5-star resort in Miami with Richard Harlow. He has photographs, Eleanor, clear ones, and receipts." A surge of grim satisfaction went through me. "That's it then," I said. "That's what we needed." "It's a very strong piece of our case for custody," Thomas agreed. "No, Thomas," I said, a new hard resolve in my voice. The fear from the night before burned away by a cold fury. "It's not just a piece. It's the leverage we need to end this. It's the bait for our trap." I explained the new plan Carl and I had devised. It was risky. It could backfire spectacularly. But at this point, playing it safe was no longer an option. Sophia had me cornered, and the only way out was to push back. Hard. Thomas was silent for a long moment after I finished. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," he said finally, his voice laced with caution, "that is a very bold move. Are you sure you're up for it? It will require a performance worthy of an Oscar." I looked at a photo of James and Lucas on the mantelpiece, their faces bright with laughter. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "She thinks she's playing with a confused old woman. It's time to show her who she's really dealing with." The next phase of the plan required me to do the one thing that went against my every instinct. I had to appear weak, defeated. I had to let Sophia believe she had won, that her threat to paint me as senile had broken my spirit. For the next few days, I leaned into the role she had cast for me. I acted more forgetful, more confused, more fragile than ever before. I would ask her what day it was multiple times. I would misplace my purse and wander the house looking for it in a daze. I let her see me looking lost and overwhelmed, sighing heavily as I looked at the mail. Her confidence soared. The passive-aggressive comments stopped, replaced by a patronizing, condescending kindness that was almost more insulting. She would pat my arm and say, "Don't you worry your pretty little head about a thing, Eleanor. I'll handle it." She thought she had broken me. She thought the fight was over, and all that remained was for me to sign the papers. Meanwhile, Mr. Fisher, the private investigator, delivered his full report to Thomas. The photographs were even more damning than I had imagined. Sophia and Richard, laughing, holding hands, kissing by a hotel pool in Miami, looking for all the world like a carefree couple on a romantic getaway, not a grieving widow and a supportive friend. Thomas had the ammunition. Now I just needed to get her to pull the trigger on herself. Carol provided the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. She showed up one afternoon with a small gift bag while Sophia was out. "A little something to cheer you up," she said with a meaningful wink. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small digital voice recorder, no bigger than a pen. "It's the latest model," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with conspiratorial excitement. "Top-of-the-line microphone. It's voice-activated, but I wouldn't trust that. Just click the button on the top once to turn it on. It'll record for 8 hours straight. A tiny, almost imperceptible blue light will flash once, then go dark. Keep it in your apron pocket. And for God's sakes, Ellie, don't forget it's there." The moment came 2 days later. As we had anticipated, Sophia's largest credit card was declined when she tried to buy groceries. The final notice for her car payment had arrived in the mail, stamped in red. Her carefully constructed financial house of cards was collapsing. She needed my signature, and she needed it now. She cornered me in the living room that evening, after Lucas was safely tucked in bed. She had a stack of financial documents and a sleek, expensive-looking fountain pen in her hand. Her face was a mask of strained patience. "Eleanor, we need to talk," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. I clutched the small recorder in my apron pocket, my thumb resting on the button. My own heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I took a deep, silent breath and clicked the button once. I felt a tiny vibration against my fingers. The trap was set. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice quavering just the right amount. "Is something wrong?" "I've been more than patient," she began, launching into a well-rehearsed speech that was equal parts threat and performance. "I've let you stay in my house. I've taken care of you, all while dealing with my own unimaginable grief. But my hands are tied. The bills are piling up. I can't even pay for Lucas's dentist appointment without access to his father's accounts. It's not right, Eleanor. It's cruel." She spread the documents on the coffee table. They were transfer of asset forms, legal papers that would give her complete control over everything. All you have to do is sign here," she said, pointing with a perfectly manicured finger. "Sign everything over to me. It's what James would have wanted. He would have wanted me and his son to be taken care of, not left to struggle." I looked at the papers, then back at her, my face a carefully constructed picture of confusion and fear. "But Thomas, the lawyer, he said I'm the trustee. He said I'm supposed to manage the college fund for Lucas. It's a big responsibility." Her patience snapped like a dry twig. "Thomas is your lawyer, not mine. He's helping you steal from me and my son. He's preying on a grieving old woman." She took a breath, visibly trying to regain her composure.
She switched tactics from aggression to what she thought was a tempting, irresistible offer. Look, let's make a deal, just you and me. You sign the papers, give me control of the house and the accounts. It's all just paper, Eleanor. In return, I will be very generous. I will grant you visitation rights. You can see Lucas on weekends, major holidays. It's more than most grandmothers get after a divorce, for example. It's a clean break for everyone. There it was. She was treating my son's death as a simple divorce, an inconvenient partnership dissolution. My son's life, my grief, Lucas's loss, it was all just a business negotiation to her. Visitation rights, I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, as if I couldn't comprehend the words. It's a very fair offer, she said coolly, confidently, and frankly, it's the only one you're going to get, because if you don't sign these papers tonight, I have other options. Other options? I asked, playing my part as the terrified, cornered old woman. Yes, she said, her eyes turning to chips of ice. I'm planning to moving, a new start. Richard, he's a dear friend who has been helping me through all this, has a wonderful business opportunity for me in Arizona. We're going to move there, me and Lucas. We'll sell this house and start fresh, away from all these painful memories. My heart hammered in my chest, but I kept my voice steady, laced with panic. You're taking Lucas to Arizona? But his school, his friends. I am his mother, she stated, flatly, her voice hard as steel. I can take him wherever I want. And if you fight me on this, Eleanor, I will go to court, and I will tell you exactly what you are. A confused, vindictive, senile old woman who is not fit to be around a child. I have your little notebook, remember? I will have you declared incompetent. You will never see Lucas again. So you have a choice. Sign the papers and get to see your grandson a few times a year, or refuse and lose him forever. She leaned back on the sofa, confident, a triumphant smirk on her lips. She had laid all her cards on the table. She thought she had presented me with an impossible, heartbreaking choice. She had no idea she had just handed me the hangman's noose and tied it around her own neck. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I let the mask of the dotty old woman drop. I let her see the clarity, the strength, and the cold, hard anger in my eyes. Thank you, Sophia, I said, my voice low and clear, and utterly devoid of fear. A flicker of confusion, of alarm crossed her face. The smirk vanished. Before she could process the sudden shift, I stood up and walked out of the room, my hand protectively covering the small device in my pocket that had just captured her entire monstrous and legally actionable confession.
The call to Thomas Bennett the next morning was short and to the point. I have it, I said, my voice steady and calm. I have all of it, every word. Within hours, the digital recording was in his hands, and our team moved with swift, decisive force. Thomas filed an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lucas, citing parental negligence, emotional endangerment, and Sophia's stated intent to remove the child from the jurisdiction. A hearing was set for the following week. When the process server delivered the papers to the house, Sophia's confident smirk from the other night was a distant memory. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions, utter disbelief, then confusion, and finally, incandescent fury. The house, which had been a Cold War zone, erupted into open conflict. She screamed at me, calling me a treacherous, manipulative old witch. She slammed doors, threw a vase against the wall, and finally packed a bag for herself and a terrified Lucas and stormed out, shouting that she would see me in court and I would regret the day I was born. I was left in the echoing silence of my son's home, the sound of shattering porcelain still ringing in my ears, preparing for the fight of my life.
The day of the hearing, the courtroom was a cold, intimidating chamber of dark wood and high ceilings. I sat at a table with Thomas, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap, my knuckles were white. Carol sat in the front row, directly behind me, a silent, solid pillar of support, who occasionally reached forward to squeeze my shoulder. Across the aisle, Sophia sat with her lawyer, Mr. Davenport. She was dressed in a modest, dark gray suit, her hair pulled back severely. She looked every bit the wronged victim, her face pale and drawn, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She was giving the performance of a lifetime, and for a terrifying moment, I wondered if it would be enough. Her lawyer went first. He was slick, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. He painted a masterful picture for the judge, a story of a devoted, grieving mother being harassed and tormented by a greedy, mentally unstable mother-in-law. He brought up my creative writing notebook, which he entered into evidence, suggesting I was living in a fantasy world, unable to distinguish reality from my own bitter delusions. "This is a woman," Davenport thundered, pointing a dramatic finger at me, "who was trying to buy a child with an inheritance that is not rightfully hers. My client, Mrs. Sophia Reynolds, only wants what is best for her son, to move on from this terrible tragedy and build a new, stable life for him away from this toxic influence." When it was Thomas's turn, he was the complete opposite. He was calm, methodical, his voice never rose. He didn't start with accusations. He started by building a foundation of cold, hard fact. He called Lucas's teacher, Mrs. Davis, to the stand. She testified, with clear reluctance but unwavering honesty, about Sophia's repeated absences from parent-teacher conferences, both before and after James's death, and about Lucas's declining grades and increasingly withdrawn behavior. He called my neighbor, Martha Henderson, who testified nervously but firmly about seeing Richard Harlow's black Mercedes at the house at all hours, and about the time Sophia left a distraught Lucas with her with almost no notice so she could go on an emergency business trip. With each witness, another crack appeared in Sophia's carefully constructed facade. She shifted in her seat, her composure beginning to fray at the edges. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, who just shook his head. Then Thomas brought out the evidence from the private investigator. He projected the photographs onto a large screen for the judge to see. There was Sophia, laughing with Richard Harlow by a sun-drenched pool in Miami, her arm draped around his shoulders, his hand resting possessively on her back. The date stamp on the photos corresponded with the weekend she had told me she was at a grief retreat. A collective gasp went through the small courtroom audience. Sophia's face went white as a sheet. Her lawyer jumped to his feet, objecting furiously about relevance and prejudicial effect, but the judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, waved him down, her eyes fixed on the screen. "And who is this man, Mr. Bennett?" the judge asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. "That, Your Honor, is Mr. Richard Harlow, a real estate developer with whom Mrs. Reynolds has been having a romantic relationship that began long before her husband's death," Thomas stated calmly. But the final, devastating blow was yet to come. "Your Honor," Thomas said, turning his attention back to the judge, "Mr. Davenport has painted a picture of my client as a confused and manipulative woman. He has painted his client as a loving mother who only wants what is best for her son. I would now like to play a recording of a conversation that took place between these two women just last week, a conversation in which Mrs. Sophia Reynolds reveals her true intentions for her son and her grandmother." Davenport was on his feet again, shouting about illegal recordings and privacy violations.
The recording was made in a shared living room, Your Honor, a space where there can be no reasonable expectation of privacy, Thomas countered smoothly, and my client, as a party to the conversation, consented to the recording. The judge considered for a moment, her gaze flicking between the two lawyers, then landing on Sophia's panicked face. "I'll allow it." Thomas pressed a button on his laptop, and Sophia's voice, cold, clear, and calculating, filled the silent courtroom. "I will be very generous. I will grant you visitation rights. I'm planning on moving to Arizona. We'll sell this house and start fresh. If you fight me on this, Eleanor, I will go to court and I will tell them that you are a confused, vindictive, senile old woman. I will have you declared incompetent. You will never see Lucas again." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and damning. Every eye in the room was on Sophia. Her face had crumpled. The mask was gone, and what was left was ugly and exposed. She was no longer a grieving widow. She was a con artist, a blackmailer, a cool and selfish woman whose monstrous plot had just been laid bare for all to see. Judge Miller looked down at Sophia from the bench, her expression one of utter contempt. She didn't even need to hear closing arguments. "Temporary custody of the minor child Lucas Reynolds is hereby granted to the petitioner, his grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds, effective immediately." The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. It was over. Tears streamed down my face, hot tears of relief, of exhaustion, of profound, sorrowful victory. Carol's arms were around me, holding me up. Across the room, Sophia sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and ruin. She had played her game, and she had lost everything. I looked over at her, not with triumph, but with a deep, aching pity for the emptiness inside her. Then I turned my back on her and walked out of the courtroom to go get my grandson.
The phone call came 2 days later. I was in the kitchen making Lucas his favorite chocolate chip pancakes, a small, deliberate act of love and normalcy. I was trying to fill the house with warmth and the comforting smell of home again. Lucas was quiet, subdued, moving through the rooms of his own house like a small ghost. He was confused by the whirlwind of the past week, his mother's frantic anger, the sterile hotel room, the hushed, tense atmosphere of the courthouse waiting room. He knew something was profoundly wrong, but he didn't have the words for it. All I could do was surround him with love, patience, and the steady rhythm of a predictable routine. When I saw Sophia's name on the caller ID, my stomach clenched into a tight, painful knot. I expected a tirade, threats, the opening salvo of a long and ugly appeals process. I stepped into the hallway, taking a deep breath to steady myself, and answered, my voice cautious. "Hello, Sophia?" The voice on the other end was flat, hollow, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. "I'm not going to fight it, Eleanor," she said. There was no apology, no remorse, no hint of sadness. It was the voice of a CEO announcing a failed merger, cutting her losses and moving on. "I'm surrendering my parental rights. My lawyer will be in touch with yours to finalize the paperwork." I was stunned into silence. I had prepared myself for a long, drawn-out custody battle, for appeals, for years of legal wrangling that would drain our finances and our spirits. This sudden, clean amputation was something I had never considered. "What?" I finally managed to say, the single word sounding loud in the quiet hallway. "He's better off with you," she said. And for a fleeting second, I thought I heard a flicker of something human in her voice, a spark of maternal conscience. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "My life is
complicated right now. The fallout from the hearing. Richard and I are moving up our plans. We're leaving for the Cayman Islands next week. A child, Lucas, would just be an inconvenience. An inconvenience. Her son, my grandson, the beautiful, bright, loving boy who was the best part of her and James. An inconvenience. The word was so cold, so monstrous, it took my breath away. I see, I said, my own voice cold now, all pity for her evaporating in the face of such profound selfishness. There was nothing more to say. She had made her choice. She had chosen a man and a fantasy life over her own child. I'll have support checks sent, she added, as if discussing a utility bill. It's the least I can do. Goodbye, Eleanor. And then she hung up. Just like that, she was gone. She had excised herself from her son's life with the clean, cold precision of a surgeon removing a tumor, never acknowledging that she was cutting away a piece of her own heart. The 3 years that followed were a time of quiet, steady healing. We didn't just rebuild the life that had been shattered. We built something new, something that was uniquely ours. The house, once a place of tension and secrets, slowly filled with laughter again. We filled it with Lucas's friends, with the smell of my baking, with movie nights and board games, and loud, silly arguments about whose turn it was to choose the pizza toppings. We found our rhythm, the two of us, a grandmother and her grandson, an unconventional family forged in tragedy but bound by a fierce, unconditional love. I went from being a weekend grandmother to a full-time parent, and I cherished every exhausting, wonderful moment of it. I attended every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, every school play. I helped with homework, packed lunches, and navigated the complex social world of a preteen boy. It was the hardest job I'd ever had, and the most rewarding. Lucas thrived. With the stability and unwavering love he had been craving, he blossomed. His grades improved, he made new friends, and the sad, haunted look in his eyes was replaced by the bright, curious spark of a happy 11-year-old boy. We talked about his dad often, sharing stories and looking at old photos. James was a constant, loving presence in our home, a hero in our stories. We talked about his mom, too, when he asked, which became less and less frequent over time. I never spoke ill of her. I simply told him, "Your mom made some difficult choices for her own life, and she wanted you to be safe and happy here with me." It was the kindest truth I could offer. Sophia kept her word. The support checks arrived every month, sent from a bank in a foreign country. On his birthday and that Christmas, a glossy, impersonal card arrived, always with a generic, pre-printed message, signed simply, "Mom." He would read them, his expression unreadable, and then he would put them away in a shoebox in his closet. She was a ghost in his life, a name without a face, a memory that was slowly fading into obscurity. One sunny afternoon, Lucas, now a lanky 11-year-old on the cusp of becoming a teenager, came home from school bursting with excitement, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. He had won first place in the district science fair for his project on building a solar-powered water purifier. He held up his big blue ribbon, his face beaming with pride that made my heart ache with love. That evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he hugged me tightly, his arms strong around my neck. "Thanks, Grandma, for everything, for coming to the science fair, for being there." "Oh, honey, I'm the one who should be thanking you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Later, as I sat in the quiet living room, the moonlight streaming through the window, I looked at the picture on the mantelpiece, James with a tiny Lucas on his shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. I had fulfilled my promise. My son's true legacy wasn't the house or the money in the college fund. It was this wonderful boy, so full of life and potential and goodness. My fight hadn't been about winning against Sophia. It had been about winning this life, this future for Lucas. My journey was a hard one I never would have chosen. It taught me that sometimes the deepest love requires us to become warriors. It taught me that strength isn't about being loud or aggressive, it's about the quiet, unyielding resolve to protect what matters most. I had to walk through the fire of grief and betrayal, but I came out the other side holding the hand of the person who mattered most in the world. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. It's a story about loss, but it's also one of the incredible, often underestimated power of a grandmother's love. Has anything like this ever happened in your family? Have you ever had to fight for someone you love in a way you never thought you could? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter, and they help us all feel a little less alone.